Okay, we're going to move on to the last topic here and give you some good tips on succeeding as a consultant. And I'll tell you, I think there's some really good insights in here I wish someone would have shared with me early in my career. And so you all get the benefit of the collective experience of the RTMC team and lessons learned here for sure. So we all want our projects to go well and the customer to be happy at the end of the project, right? But how do we get there? Well, first we need to have a vision for what done means and what good looks like. And one way to think about it is in the line you see right here. The team delivered what was required and in line with expectations, on time and on budget. But beyond that, we need to do a few things. We need to set and manage expectations internally and with our customer. We need to communicate. Make sure we keep people informed. We need to stay in bounds, meaning stay within the scope of the project or the assignment that we were brought in to do. Don't let scope creep come in and don't drift. Let's focus on delivering value to our customer. Good quality work that's done on time and on budget. And then strive to build relationships with our teammates and with the customer. So what about being successful internally? What does a consultant need to do in your organization to be successful? Well, a lot of it depends on the rules, the policies, and other norms or cultural ideas within your organization. But you're probably not going to find these written down anywhere with your company logo on it. But trust me, let's do these things, these keys that we're going to talk about. Number one, show up, be on time to work and to meetings. Know what the rules, policy, and norms are in your organization. So if you don't know those today, go ask. Find a veteran, find somebody that's been there and knows what the cultural norms are in your organization or what the policies and rules are, and ask them. And then log your time on time. That's key to project management. It's key to measurement. It's key to resource management. And it has a huge impact on billing, which is how our firm gets paid. So let's make sure you're logging your time and make sure you do it on time. And then be willing to lend a hand and help out. Go the extra mile. Avoid the bad handoff. So, be willing to raise your hand and say, hey, I'm happy to jump in and help here if it's needed. Maybe I'm not the expert, but I can go ask and get help. Go outside your comfort zone a little bit, but let's make sure we do that. Let's raise our hand. Let's be front and center and be willing to jump in and help out. Avoiding the bad handoff, I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but ultimately that's making sure that we educate and communicate to who we're handing things off to, but then also making sure we follow up to make sure that they're getting the task done or whatever they need to do to follow up with the customer. Make sure that happens. And then keep your skills profile updated. That makes a big difference in your future assignments. So if I'm a resource manager, I'm looking at, okay, what skill sets does this person have? What education do they have? What experience do they have? So let's make sure that you keep those skills updated so that when I'm a resource manager looking for potential candidates, you rise right up to the top of the list. And so some helpful tools here that you can put in your consulting tool belt, because inevitably you're going to need to be able to problem solve. You're also going to need to be able to recognize issues and risks as you're working as a consultant. And then you're going to need to be able to navigate difficult situations. So these are all things that I still run into as a consultant. So we're going to give you a few tools and techniques that you can use when you need to do these things well. So let's start here with problem solving, because that's ultimately what we do as consultants, right? We're solving one problem after another. So one of the techniques that you can use to evaluate a scenario and make sure you're addressing the problem or the root cause of that problem, and not just one of the symptoms, is to do what any 3-year-old would do. They ask why. We call this the 5 whys. You have a problem and you ask why up to 5 times, you'll ultimately land on the cause. So in our example, we've got client ABC Systems that's unhappy. So we ask why. Well, because we did not deliver our services when we said we would. Well, why didn't we do that? The job took much longer than we thought it would. Why? Because we underestimated the complexity of the job. Why did we do that? Because we made a quick estimate of the time needed to complete it and did not list the individual stages. Well, why did we do a quick estimate? Well, we were running behind on our projects. So ultimately, maybe we need to review our time estimation and specification procedures. That's kind of the root of the problem. ABC Systems is unhappy, but it took us a few questions or a few whys to get to the root of the problem. So for navigating difficult situations, even the best, most effective consultants have to deal with difficult situations. And how you deal with that adversity when the chips are down is critical to your success as a consultant. So what can we do to help us navigate through difficult times on our projects? Well, number one, let's anticipate. Let's plan ahead and prepare for those situations that may occur. Let's care. Let's be committed and have empathy. There are times where we have to have difficult situations or difficult conversations to go through, but let's be committed to getting through those and have empathy with our customers or internally as we go through those situations. Let's practice. Practice keeping your head, practice rehearsing what you would say if you hit certain scenarios. So be prepared for those scenarios as they may arise. And then last here, let's expect. Let's expect the best, but also expect mistakes. We're all human, so there's going to be mistakes that come up. So let's expect mistakes, and again, rehearse in our head. Okay, how are we going to handle if something goes south? Here's how we're going to keep our head, and here's how we're going to address the situation and get a game plan to move forward. So here's some helpful tips to address difficult situations. So from a communication standpoint, don't hide issues. Engage in proactive conversations with your stakeholder. So you may start to pick up on a theme here. We've said that many times. Let's be transparent. Let's not hide behind issues. Let's be proactive in communicating those. Documentation. Use documentation to record agreements or conversations that have happened. And then status updates. Status reports exist for a reason. So don't let project work get in the way of this important tool. We like to have those status updates on a regular basis so that we can make sure we're all aligned as we move forward. What we don't want to have is a problem that's stewing and we haven't had a status update to address it or to talk about it. And so it keeps stewing and then it becomes a bigger problem than it needs to be. Informal communications, develop and maintain relationships. Leverage those informal communications to develop good relationships and bonds with your customers. And then demeanor, make sure we always remain calm and act professionally. And then be visible. Don't be a wallflower. The customer is paying you for your expertise and your opinion. So have a point of view and back it up with facts and make sure we share it appropriately. So like we talked about earlier with giving advice, make sure our advice is being sought. So don't just give your point of view to give your point of view, but do have a point of view when you're addressing these difficult situations and back it up with facts and say, this is how we need to move forward and be confident in that. All right, so let's move on to issues and risks. Inevitably, we're going to run into issues and risks on our projects. It's important that we as consultants know what they are and how we can play a role in the issue and risk management process. I want to first define what risks and issues are, because I'll tell you, still to this day, we run into clients all the time who get these backwards. So at a fundamental level, I think of a risk as something, likely an event or a situation that could have an adverse impact on our project. That's the key word there, is could. So in other words, it could happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And if it does happen, then it likely has an adverse impact on the project. An issue, on the other hand, is a problem that has happened. So it has happened, and now we have to address it. So let's look at issues and risks from a really practical standpoint. First, to drive the definition home, and then we'll get into some project examples. So a risk. It's usually, like we said, an unknown event which could happen, may take place during a project that could affect the cost, schedule, scope, or quality. So two practical examples here. We got a guy on his motorcycle on a tightrope, it looks like, and then a lady knitting over here in the corner with a lion in the middle of the room. So right now we have risk, right? So we have something that could happen that could have an adverse impact. We don't have an issue at the moment. We do have risk because something bad could happen. And then on the other side of that, an issue is an immediate problem that needs to be solved, and a lot of times that means by adding new tasks to the project plan, an extended schedule, or an increase to budget because it's something that we have to deal with immediately. So some easy examples of issues. We got a plane in the river, and then we got a bridge that has fallen down. So these are immediate problems that need to be solved, and there's likely going to be new tasks or new work effort that needs to happen to resolve these tasks that we weren't planning for. So we weren't planning for that bridge to collapse, but now that it has, we're going to need material and man hours to get that bridge fixed. So let's talk through some common project issues and risks. So let's start with common project risks. We have a lack of client commitment to the project. So that's something that could impact the project adversely. We have poorly defined scope and requirements. So right now, we don't feel like we've got a good grasp on what the scope and requirements are, but that's not an issue yet. It is something that's a risk that could adversely impact the project down the road. We have complexity with our global deployment. So you notice these things have not occurred yet, but they could occur and it could cause problems. So what are some common project issues? Well, the customer is not able to commit resources for the requirements in the design. Well, now we've got an issue because this is likely going to cause us to delay the project or cause us to have to get different resources, go get more expensive resources, go contract with resources, whatever the case may be. We have a critical item of scope that has been missed. Well, now it's an issue because we've got to deal with this. We've got to get that critical item done, and we weren't planning for it. And then we have certain geographies that are behind in their operational readiness for deployment. And so that may impact our timeline. So again, these are all things that have happened and need to be dealt with immediately. And so anytime we're dealing with issues and risks, communication is key. We know that surprises are not a good thing on our projects. So if we find an issue or a risk, we need to lift it up. And most likely, we need to lift that up to our project manager. And when we do that, we can leverage our project manager and other team members to figure out the best way to communicate with the client. So I think what you're going to find is, it's important that we tell customers about issues and risks, particularly issues, but it is a balancing act. So we talk about here, communicating every little thing can create a negative perception by the customer. So if we have every little issue that we lift up, they're going to say, man, these guys have a lot of quality issues. But not telling the customer and having something that blows up can cause, big negative repercussions for our company. So we've got to balance that. And then sometimes, things that seem like an issue, they end up getting resolved on their own. But on the other hand of that, customers like to be aware and involved with the issue resolution process. Again, surprises are not good. So we've got to balance on, how much do we communicate and when do we communicate with our customers when we're talking about issues. All right, so now the fun begins. Let's talk about growing in your career as a consultant. The first point at the top here, you're a consultant. This is your career, so own it. Take ownership of this career and drive your success. There's a lot of work we can do as consultants to continue to improve and drive our effectiveness as a consultant. So here's some ideas here. Work hard. Don't be afraid of putting in a little bit of extra effort, extra time, extra training, whatever it may be. Work hard. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Build a network of internal go-to people that you can turn to when you need help. So build relationships. This is where we talked about having informal conversations with people. If you're in the break room, don't just go to the break room, get your stuff out of the fridge, and go back to your desk. Have a conversation. Talk to people. Get to know them on a personal level. Next, identify skills and experience you want to gain in order to progress in your career. And work with your manager to build a development plan. Ultimately, this, again, is your career, so own it. Where do you want to go with this? What skills do you want to gain? What experiences do you want to have? And lift those up and make sure you have a plan to get there. Take advantage of training that your company offers. A lot of companies have robust training programs that you can register for and take. Go look and see what's available. It's a good way to build new skills that you need to grow and develop. And remember, as you take that training or as you get more skills, make sure you keep those skills profiles updated so that the resource managers that are responsible for assigning you to engagements know what skills you have or what experiences you have and can get you on the most appropriate engagements. Take advantage of time on the road with your teammates. That's a great opportunity to build relationships and learn from colleagues who have been there and done that. I think back to early in my career, I got on some projects early on with some resources who had been with our company for 15, 20 years. So it was a great way to pick their brain about, tell me about one of the toughest conversations you had to have. Tell me about one of the best clients you worked with. How'd you build relationships with them? Just a great way to pick their brain and learn. And then whether it's inside or outside your organization, I think it's key for you to identify a mentor and then set up regular times to meet with him or her. And again, this is your career, so you've got to own it. So you got to go find the mentor, but you also have to drive the agenda or drive what you want to talk about with that mentor. And then identify an internal advocate. This is somebody internally to your organization that can help you with future opportunities. So maybe there's a promotion or maybe there's a different team that you're looking at. This person can help maybe give you an internal push whenever it's needed. And then the last thing here, maximize your one-on-one time with your manager. One, ask them for feedback. Ask them for critical feedback specifically. Ask them about potential opportunities. So where's there opportunities for me to jump in on a project? Don't be shy. Don't sit back and wait for them to just bring things to you. Make things happen for yourself. Come to that meeting with an agenda, with things that you want to discuss. Here's what I want to do with my career. Here's how I want to progress. How can you help me get there? And so, I think these are all good things to think about. And hopefully you can take a few notes and think through, how can I do some of these things to help me grow in my career as a consultant? And so to continue on that path, further developing our consulting skills, to be successful, we need to have a solid foundation of skills. We need to have necessary soft skills, which is more the art of being a consultant. We need to have business for business specific skills. We need to know how to manage customers effectively, how to communicate effectively, to set and manage expectations, and then, being the trusted advisor, and then upselling and cross-selling, among many others. Let's take a look at some professional services examples of how we can move from that effective consultant to a trusted consultant status. So from a scope management standpoint, an effective consultant is good at controlling scope creep. So we know what the scope is and we can control that. Where the trusted consultant moves to creating cost-effective client and project outcomes. From identifying and capturing value standpoint, an effective consultant is dependent on sales. So we expect sales to create new opportunities for us to go and deliver. Where a trusted consultant is proactive in identifying ways to drive additional value and adoption with customers. From an issue management standpoint, an effective consultant is a good firefighter, where a trusted consultant is going to manage situations to a desired outcome. So be more proactive in managing that situation to get where we want it to go versus fighting the fires that come up. From a communication standpoint, an effective consultant is good at proactively communicating, where a trusted consultant is good at that, but also influential communication. From the role of a consultant, an effective consultant is good at project delivery, where a trusted consultant moves more to value delivery. So we're delivering value for that customer. And then from an engagement process standpoint, an effective consultant is good at managing projects, where the trusted consultant is good at managing those expectations with customers. The last thing I want to leave you with for this section is an activity to help you think about your support system. So I would encourage you to maybe, write these questions down as I kind of go through and talk through them. And after this course, spend some time and sit down and actually think through this. Because to maximize your success, you're going to need help. We all need help. And so take a few minutes after this to think about potential candidates for your support system. Who are peers that are inside and outside of your team that may be able to help support you when you need help? So think about the different ways that you may need help within your organization, whether that's culturally, whether that's, navigating some of the internal teams, who in your organization can help you with that. Another thing is to think about who would be a good candidate to be your internal advocate. So remember, we talked about this internal advocate, somebody that's got a voice in the organization that can maybe, help throw your name out there, kind of push you toward a certain role or potentially, promotion or a higher level within your team. And then, is there a person inside or outside your organization that you would like to engage as a mentor? If somebody doesn't come to mind right away, that's okay. Just keep that in the forefront of your mind and think about, okay, as I meet different people, who's someone that could be my mentor? And then again, remember, you're going to drive your success as a consultant. So you're going to drive